Hey everyone, today I'm taking a look at Assyria, which is a 2 to 4 player Euro game designed by Emanuel Ornella and published by Assyria Games with Rio Grande Games. This one takes 45 to 90 minutes to play on average. Now before I get started on my review of Assyria, I want to give a shout out to the show sponsor KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer when it comes to purchasing board games here. And if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so I've set up for a 3-player game of Assyria here. Now, if you are to play with fewer than that maximum player count of 4, then certain parts of the board are cordoned off. So anything beyond this thick black line here in a 3-player game is out of bounds. And in a 2-player game, it'll be even tighter than that. Now we've all started with a base temple on the board here for the 3 players. You have the score track around the outside. You have this camel track here which monitors how many camels you have to spend, and that's a very important resource in the game. You have these 3 kind of deities here that you're trying to gain the influence of for end of round scoring, as well as other bonuses. Now you're also going to set up a number of cards here depending on the player count. So if you are playing with 3 players, you're going to have 4 columns of 2 cards, but with the 4 players, you're going to have 5 columns of 2 cards. This is the remainder of the deck. You've got some additional tracks here that you can climb depending on how much coverage you have on the board, and some little useful symbology here as well. Now each player's pieces are going to look like this, where you have a bunch of these huts which you're using to influence on the board to kind of signify how much control you have. You've got these other temples that you can build, and they come in 3 different tiers. So you can see here that if I was to later improve this temple, you can have it looking like this, which will make it a lot more powerful in terms of generating points. You have these wells that you can put down on the board, and again there'll be more or fewer than these depending on the player count, and each player is going to start with 1 card and also one of these plough cards, which is a wild. So the game is going to play out over 8 turns, and that is broken down into 3 ages. The first age is going to be 2 turns, the second and third ages are going to be 3 turns each, and that is kind of monitored by these cards that come out at random. Now this is going to show how many huts you can put down on the board this turn, or how many new huts, as well as being endgame points that you can potentially gain by having the majority or control over these 3 different gods here. But let's talk about how the turn structure is broken down. So after these cards have been laid out, you are going to go in to the harvest phase, where you'll be drafting one of these 4 columns in a 3-player game. Of course, there'll be another one in a 4-player game. And these are important because they are going to show where you can put your huts down onto the main board. And you can see here that they kind of improve as they go along. So you're going to start here with the 1 resources, and then it might go to the 2s and even 3s, and there are even wild cards in the deck. And these are drawn completely at random, but they are put in kind of priority order in terms of going from worst to best. Now you might ask, why don't I always just take the best column? And that is because if you take the the best column here, you are going to be worst in terms of player initiative. So let's say the yellow player went here, and then the red player went here. Yes, their cards might not be as good, but they are going to go first in taking their actions on the board. So once everybody has taken their cards and the new turn order has been established, you are then going to start supplying the board with your huts depending on the card that was drawn here. So I can place 3 new huts onto the board because that 3 card was drawn. Now what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to match the symbols on the board with the cards that I have in my hand. So you can see here that I have a bunch of different resources, and any card that has more than 1 resource on it can be used for multiple sites. So, these grapes here, I could use that single card to cover multiple spots. But bearing in mind that I always have to chain off from where I already have presence. So let's just say, without thinking too much, I wanted to use this fern here to go onto this spot. Again, this is perfectly legal because it's right next to my temple. Then I have these kind of dates here. So maybe I will go here like so. And I've only got 1 left, but let's just say I wanted to use my wild card here to jump on this spot like so. Now, something that's important to say is that if you have the resources, then you have to spend that card. So in this example, I still have this grape card in my hand, but I'm not sat on any grape hexes. Therefore, I can keep this in my hand ready for the next round of. And once you have placed all your huts onto the board, then you are going to resupply those spaces. So something that's important to say is that maybe in a previous round I could have had maybe something like this and had some huts already existing on the board. But if you remember, these are the only 3 symbols that I actually put onto the board this turn, or had cards for. Therefore, these are going to shift into the middle because I've paid those fees, and anything that I've not paid this turn is going to be removed from the board and is going to have to be put back on later. So let's talk about what all the different spots on the board do and what we're actually trying to achieve here. So any supplied hut you have on each river is going to give you a number of camels. The first one on each river is going to give you 3, and the second one is going to give you 2. So in this example, you'll have 5 camels. But if I say was to have another one on the other side, that first one would also give me 3. So it always goes 3 for the first one and then 2 for the second one. Any hut that I have in between the 2 rivers is going to generate me 2 victory points, which will, of course, I'll mark on the score track. Any ones that I have on the extremities of the rivers, as in north of the 2 rivers or south of the 2 rivers, is going to give you 1 victory point. However, if you ever have a triangle of hexes like this and they're all supplied, then you can immediately place one of these wells, which will instantly give you points, depending on how early it is in the game. So in the first age, they're going to be worth 6 points each. In the second age, they're going to be worth 5 points each. And in the third age, they're going to be worth 4 points each. Also, every ziggurat you have on the board will generate you points depending on how tall they are. So for every level, you're going to get 1 point. So in this example, I'd only get 1 point. But of course, if I built more or even extended them in terms of height, then that's going to be more points as income. So once each player has taken all of their revenue and prestige, you are going to go into the main action phase, which is where you are going to spend your camels to do a number of different things. So the first thing you can do with your camels is that you can, of course, build new ziggurats, which will cost you 6 camels to build the first layer here, which is great because it will give you a new spawning point on the board, as well as start generating you more points. And to do that, you're going to have to replace an existing hut on the board, considering that you cannot actually go next to any existing wells. So these wells do come with a little bit of a restriction there. To build the second layer of a ziggurat is going to cost you 3 camels, and the top layer is going to cost you 2, but you can only extend each ziggurat site once per round. The next thing you can do is you can actually contribute influence to the different deities here. And they are going to cost you either 4, 3, or 2 camels, depending on which one you want to go to. And they will come with different bonuses. So first bonus they'll have is they'll give you a number of influence points when it comes to end of round or end of season majorities. Because if you remember, each round there's going to be a new one of these hut cards that come out. And whoever has the most influence amongst these gods by the end of the age, you are going to get a number of points equal to all of them added up. The person with the second most will get all of them added up minus the best card, and the third player would get the next kind of category down. So this is quite a significant way of getting points. But you can also see that each of the deities has an individual power, such as if you have, say I managed to have 3 huts here with this particular deity, then that would be an extra 8 points there. Whereas if I only had 1, that'd be 1 point. If I had 2, it would be 4 points. This one here will give you a plough card at the end of the age if you've got some presents there. And this one here will give you more camels. Another thing you can do is to make an offering and climb up this track here. And you can spend 1 to 3 camels to do this, to move 1 to 3 spaces. So let's just say I did spend 3 camels and moved up 3 spots like this. Now what this means is at the end of the age, you are going to multiply your number of ziggurat sites. So in this example, I've only got 1, but of course you could have more later, and multiply it by this number. So if you manage to get all of 4 of your ziggurats down, that could be 4 times 4 there for a massive 16 points. And this track will be taken back to the beginning at the end of each age. And the final thing you can do with your camels is you can buy any remaining food cards that were not drafted during that initial draft for either 1 or 2 camels each, depending on how good they were. Or you can even buy one of these plough cards if there are any available. And you can only ever have one of these in your hand at any time. And that is essentially how the game works. So if it's not the end of an age, you are simply going to slide all these back off here to show that they've not been paid for this round. And you're going to, of course, restock the cards and go again in that new turn order. Now, if it is the end of an age, you are going to be dishing out these points here. as I mentioned earlier, depending on the influences on these tracks. And there's going to be a flooding where everything on a river is going to be removed. And there is also going to be some additional points based on, again, the actual individual gods available there. And after that, and something I didn't mention as well, is that, of course, that ziggurat scoring will happen with the multipliers. And after 3 ages of that, again, the first age being 2 cards, and the second and third ages being 3 cards each, you're going to add up all your points, and the player with the most points will be the winner. Okay, so let's share some thoughts on Assyria. Now, of course, I have taken some shortcuts here and only given examples using one player's actions here, but as you can imagine, the board does quickly get swallowed up by the other players, and the board is deceptively tight. And that's what makes the turn order so interesting and so important, because yes, you do want the best cards, of course, because you can have so much presence on the board, keeping stuff on there and putting new huts on there. But if you are going last, then all of the hexes you wanted might have been swallowed up by the other players before you even get your turn. And it might even be or force you to make wasteful moves, because although you might not have the cards to actually replenish them and resupply them on the board, you can use them to skip through onto new hexes and claim new spots. Yeah, but of course you are going to have to waste that placement, because it's going to come automatically off the board when you cannot pay for it. So I do love that conflicting mechanism of going first and not having the best cards, or going last and having a ton of cards to play with. And I also love the element of strategy here when you got to sit back and think, you know what, now is not the time to waste this card. I can save it for a super turn next turn, because I might not be getting my full value from it. Like, you know, I used that grape example earlier when I thought, well, I don't want to commit to grapes because I probably could only reach one spot and I'm not getting too much out of it. Whereas if I keep it next turn, I can maybe spam loads on the board and really, milk it for what it's worth. But at the same time, you are at the mercy of the huts that are going to come out next turn, because these range from values 2 to 4. Now, if you have 4 new huts to put down, then that's great, of course, if you do have those cards. But if you are only drawing the 2 and you don't have any presence on the board, then that's going to be a pretty weak round for you. So I love that kind of juxtaposition of keeping presence on the board from the previous rounds, as well as putting new huts onto the board. And these huts are limited, and you are using them for different things. Of course, again, keeping them on the board, putting new huts on the board, but also if you end up making donations to these different gods here, you are tying up these huts, meaning that they're not going to be deployable. So there's just this perfect amount of huts here, which makes your decisions more meaningful and how to utilize them. I also love the multiple paths to victory here. There are so many things you can go for. Like, you can straight up just get as much presence as you can between the rivers here, because that's going to be 2 points per placement, which is quite significant if you have multiple huts in those areas. You can try and establish those wells by building those little triangles outside of those 2 rivers. And there are even cool little twists you can do here. Like, for example, if one turn I manage to establish this triangle here and build a well like so, then the next round I might manage to have these 2 resources, keep them on the board, but switch this one over here, and all of a sudden I've got a new one as well. So you can actually kind of spread this and kind of chain out and start spreading your influence that way. And of course you are under pressure to get that done earlier to get the best return on those wells, because the first round is going to be a massive 6 points each. But of course these are a finite resource, and they do quickly get swallowed up if there are multiple players going for that particular strategy. At the same time, you can go for more dependable points by building up the ziggurats. Now, these ziggurats are great because they are just ticking points. They just start generating you points passively at each income phase. But they also have a second benefit by giving you new spawning points, because if you are just restricted to your initial ziggurat placement, you're always going to be looking for the same placement spots or symbols. Whereas if you start establishing them elsewhere, you've got so much more flexibility to get where you want to get to. And at the same time, you're juggling all these things with actually getting your income of camels in the first place, because without camels, you're going to be pretty restricted on what you can do. And, even with those camels, there are so many different options. Are you going to increase those multipliers and go for that hand-in-hand strategy with your multiplier and your ziggurats, as well as building them up? You can, spread them in terms of numbers. You want to be at least competing with these. And if you let somebody run away with this, especially if they get so much presence down in this top little god here, they're going to get a bonus 8 points, as well as having the majority of these card influence, which is a huge swing of points there. And all of these are viable strategies, and I just love the way that you have just a buffet of options at all times. I do find the game engaging, and I don't think there's much scope here to lose interest. The game does tick by pretty quickly. You are looking at around 75 minutes here from my own experience. And I think the engagement really comes from not only what you're doing now, but also thinking ahead to the next round and what you want to do. If you are falling behind on camels, you might want to start claiming new camel spots, as in getting spaces on the river, but that might have been swallowed up by other players. So I do like the fact that you are not only looking at new spots to claim, but also thinking about what you want to maintain on the board, because as soon as you slip up and don't get that resource card to keep yourself resupplied on the board, then you're going to remove your hut from the board, and somebody else is going to sneak right in there, and you're going to have to wait for them to slip up in order to get it back. So I do like the way that works. And then, you are competing with the other players on a number of different fronts, not only get competition on the board itself in terms of real estate, but also, are you going to have a play with the most influence in terms of camels? That initiative order is so important when it comes to establishing the majorities here, because if you have enough camels, you can just spam your 2 spots here, which is a lot of influence when it comes to the end of round scoring or the end of age scoring, as well as straight up victory points here. So you are always engaged about is there an opening somewhere, and if they're going to go for this thing and they've got a monopoly here, maybe I'll focus here instead. And all of these things come together to make quite a rich game, considering how fast it is really, and it's not terribly complex or complicated. As with most games that use a degree of area control or area majority, I do prefer that 3 or 4 player count just to add some more interest and a bit more dynamism into the game. But I do appreciate that the game does maintain a nice tight board, even if you do go down to that 2 player count. But for me personally, I've not even tried the game at 2 players, and I probably wouldn't, because again, I do like that extra competition when it comes to coverage of the board, as well as competition over the gods here. I think they've done a good job with the production here. Yes, I understand this beige look isn't for everybody, but everything is clear. There's not much symbology, and it's all pretty straightforward. All the wooden pieces look good on the board, especially when these temples are stacked. I think maybe the only minor issue I have is that a couple of these symbols look a bit similar, like this kind of wheat and the ferns. At a glance, you can get them mixed up. The cards are a small size, but you don't really need to shuffle them much, and they're good quality, and everything just works as it should. I actually do like the size of the board as well, because it's not too big and it's also not too small, so it's quite convenient and ergonomic to use. So generally speaking, this is very standard production when it comes to games of this era from Assyria, which is kind of my cup of tea really. So I do like the kind of not overwrought and just simplistic design here, where they've just kept it simple but still of a good quality. Okay, so let's share some final thoughts on Assyria, and I think this game is excellent. If you watch my channel regularly, you might know that I'm a big fan of the Astari line of games. There really haven't been many duds that they've ever put out, and this one is right up there for me with the best of them. I think it feels so different, despite having a lot of similarities to other games out there on the market, but I do love this temporary presence on the board. It does put you under a lot of pressure, and even makes you feel a bit uncomfortable at times when it comes to spinning all those plates, because it has a great pacing to it, where you might have some weaker rounds, some stronger rounds, but if you're quite careful and savvy about which cards you keep back into your hands, ready for stronger next turns, this kind of thing, and not wasting those additional symbols when it comes to multiple symbols on a card. It's so satisfying when you manage to have all your huts on the board and generating you loads of camels, loads of points, wells, etc. in a single turn. And it can become a little bit brain burnery when it comes to allocating the resources, and of course you are always competing and rubbing elbows with the other players to nudge your way into the spaces that they wanted, and that all ties back to that very important turn order. I love games that really put a focus on player initiative, and this game does it. Probably a top 10 game for me when it comes to the importance of turn order. And again, it comes back to how tight the board is, the competition for the gods, trying to get the majorities here, and again, so many different ways to get victory points. And I love games that come with all those options and trying to craft out and carve out a little niche for yourself. If somebody's focusing on something and get a monopoly over there, you know what, maybe we should build more ziggurats, maybe we should get dominance on the map and increase these multipliers for the end of the round. And I love those different options you have available, and even balancing those instant points with those camels as currency. So yeah, I actually think this game is so interesting. It feels unique, and I'm surprised this one isn't talked about more. I understand the look isn't for everybody, but if you do like those old school German style Euros, this one really does stand out, and it's definitely found its place in my collection. And I'm always excited to get this one onto the table. It's pretty intuitive, if not, in fact, after a few turns, it starts to click into place, because the turn structure is a little bit choppy at times. You do have to very formulaically remember all the different turns and the way in which things are resolved. But it's not too bad. I'm probably overstating that. But generally speaking, I think it works pretty smoothly once you've got a few turns out of your system. And I really do enjoy this one. And I highly, highly advocate it if your tastes of games align with mine. So this is certainly going to get a shield of quality, and it's actually steadily found its place in my top 100, and I'm excited to see where this places kind of at the end of the year when it comes to calculating what my top 100 will be, because I think this is going to have a surprisingly good spot. So that is Assyria, another solid and excellent game, in fact, by Istari.